All right. So I am here with John Berwick, who is, I suppose, my predecessor at Deutsche Welle. He's the man who did the work of the Vaticanist for Deutsche Welle for years before I landed there. And now I suppose we can both say we are in a happy post Deutsche Welle sort of retirement of sorts.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's really a pleasure to have him on because I admire him and I have enormous respect, among other things. I mean, for his kindness, but also because of his knowledge of the issue that he calls himself to adjudicate on, which, coming from journalism, I could say it's not only a rarity, having somebody who knows his topic is almost exotic. So it's good to see you, although I only saw you less than like 5 days ago, I think, or less than a
That's
week
right. Yes,
ago,
in Berlin. Yes.
here in Berlin, which was very, very nice. So I called you and I asked you, would you jump on one of these podcasts that everybody's doing, which means that we're guaranteed not to be seen by anybody, to talk about another hot topic of the moment, which is the Kardashians. No, I'm kidding. Pope Leo, Pope Leo, and the end of the Francis papacy. And you were very, very kind to, humor me with this. So welcome, I suppose, after that very long, rather, rather
Embarrassing
useless
introduction.
introduction. Yes, I'd been practicing this for years. I mean, would stand in front of the mirror. Uh, okay, so I think that we're one of the only two people that I have known that truly get excited about Vatican, about the inner workings of the Vatican, and about the broader impact of the Vatican. And I guess a place where we can start is how did you receive the death of Francis?
Well, it was expected, of course. I mean, we saw him virtually dying right up until the day or two right before he died. Of course, we saw him on camera. Even that meeting with J.D. Vance, which was extraordinary, I thought, because he knew obviously that he only had a matter of hours probably to live, and he allowed himself to be the object, I would say, of a photo op. Um, and with a man who had, in fact, been really rather insulting towards him. And that is the kind of generosity and kindness of Pope Francis that I find very moving. I think he was a very great man.
I have to say that, well, on a light note, I would say that I had a grandmother that had like various rehearsals of death, and then she got better in every case. And because I'd been following Francis so closely for so long, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, he has been in and out of hospitals and quite sick. Um, and the strange thing is that it was only probably 2 days after he died that I saw again his last statement from the balcony overlooking St. Peter's, and it was only then that I realized how incredibly frail and how close to death he was. I mean, somehow it had not really dawned on me that this really could be the end.
Really?
Yeah,
It
it's
was to me very clear when the statement was issued that his personal nurse had said to the doctors, do everything possible to keep him alive. That was just before Easter.
right.
And the doctors quite clearly, from interpreting that remark, quite clearly were thinking about simply letting him die in peace at that point.
Yeah.
And the significance of Easter is obvious. It was quite obvious that Francis wanted to be alive that Easter.
Mm.
And he appeared, of course, to the crowds at St. Peter's and gave them his blessing at Easter and died at Easter. So it was pretty clear to me that it was a matter of days, and probably it would be straight after Easter.
I think I think I had basically the same problem that I had with David Bowie. I just simply refused to believe that this figure could really go away. Um, and I will say that for myself, and this is really, I mean, we discussed this when we saw each other, but it bears repeating that um, from my position, which, as you know, I mean, as an atheist and as a Jew, I still felt it as a very sizable personal loss. Probably
That's
because
a very interesting point, because I think he was one of the most extraordinary things about him, of course, is that he appealed to and was revered by many people who were not Catholic and certainly not even religious, were not believers in any way, as no other pope, I think. Uh,
what do you attribute that to?
well, I think it was quite obviously his extraordinary compassion for people, um, his refusal to be judgmental, his inclusivity, um, his enormous patience. And that came, I think, through because of a personal thing, a personal experience that he had, as we know, in his early life. That when he was relatively early life, when he was the Jesuit superior in Argentina, and when he made a bad decision, which he later himself saw was a very bad decision, that he opposed to confreres, young Jesuit priests who were working with the poor and who had, in his view, Marxist, dangerously Marxist views, um, that he uh, ordered them to stop their ministry. And that was a kind of blank check to the junta in Argentina to arrest them. They were tortured. They remained in prison for several years. And Bergoglio, his name at the time, Cardinal Bergoglio, of course, considered himself personally responsible. It was very significant that when he became Pope, one of them had already died. The other one he invited to the Vatican, and he wanted to apologize and make peace. But he had himself, he said this a number of times without specifically referring to this incident. He had himself a sense, a very strong sense of having been forgiven. And I think that huge, enormous sense of gratuitous forgiveness without having earned it or being able to earn forgiveness gave him a very strong sense of not wishing to judge other people and being uh, willing gratuitously to forgive. He said memorably, if God did not forgive everything, the world would no longer exist.
Hmm. What on the other side of that? What is your understanding of the echo uh, that he has had beyond sort of the church? I mean, from the side of the man, there is this. I think that there was something very candorous, and there was something very well, there was something very forthcoming about him. I mean, it was charisma to some degree. I
Yeah.
mean, to a very large degree. I think there was this light Argentinian touch, which is somewhere between Spanish and Italian, with a few drops of tango and a little bit of football plus steak in there. I say this half jokingly, but in a sense, I think that this sort of strange hot pot of cultural things in which there is a lot of permissibility for mistake and for straying, let's say, for picadillos, um, is something that made him very affable. But I think on the other side, I mean, the thing that to me remains quite curious is um, he would not have failed had he built a political movement, which presumably he did, although not under that name. But it appealed way beyond the walls of the church. I mean, my
Absolutely.
question is, how do you account for the impact and the echo that this papacy had way beyond the church? And I would say that even in places which are deeply antagonistic to the idea of the church as an institution. Right? I
Well,
mean,
it is.
liberals and left
Yes.
wingers and progressives and feminists and you name them.
There were also people who disliked him, of course. One has to
Mhm.
see this. I mean, he was
For sure.
he was attacked also, particularly by the ultra-right, one could say, political wing of American Catholics, who saw his advocacy for the marginalized people of the world, for refugees and migrants, as what they called Marxist. I mean, there's this absurd application of the term Marxism to anything that is not ultra right in the political sphere. But I think this sense that I mean, I live in Romania now, which is predominantly, at least nominally, an Orthodox Christian country, not Catholic. The Catholic Church is very tiny here. And of course, it had a long communist history, which means that there are also, as in most of Eastern Europe, there are also a very, very high percentage of atheists. And I am astonished by this phenomenon which you describe, that again and again, when people find out that I am Catholic, who say to me so warmly that, oh, we don't have anybody like Francis in the political sphere or in the Orthodox Church. He was a very, very exceptional person. I think it's difficult to pin down exactly. You're right, of course, about the particular personal charism of the man and this cultural element that you talk about. But I think it was more than that. I mean, he was also somebody who always listened very carefully to people and gave them the sense that they could be themselves, and even in their worst, with the darkest corners of their soul that they themselves didn't want to look at, that he accepted them as they were. I think that's an extraordinary gift, that he was able to communicate that. I think it was not something he played or pretended. I think it's something he deeply felt.
There's something very interesting that took place about 2 years before he ascended to the papacy in Argentina, where the church was being attacked, and he personally was being attacked quite ruthlessly by the Peronist government, which was the left of the Peronist government. So Peronism is a little bit like ketchup; you really can put it on anything. And this particular period was basically accompanying left-wing ideas on the surface, of course, as it usually happens in politics. And the curious thing that happened is that he attacked the left wing of the Peronist for the massive sort of broadening of poverty and discrimination and so on, but where mainly he was attacking the left with causes that belong to the left. And I think that what was very, very curious about it, and very successful, I must say, is that the line of argument actually resonated. So it was not really that, this was just the church posing. It really had all the trappings of a very concrete political demand, a political demand that had a lot to do with social justice, access, etc., things that belong obviously not only to the Catholic Church and the type of pastoral project that Francis had, and I mean the Jesuits and Augustinians to a lesser degree, but I mean we will get to that in a few minutes. But theology of liberation and so on. But I mean, it belongs to democratic values. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because one of the things that I see, specifically from my perspective, but also interested in the political question, is the fact that I think that Francis understood very clearly from very early, much earlier than that particular event, that the church could really do a massive amount of weightlifting for the values of democratic republicanism. I think that he saw an overlapping that should not have been missed by anybody, but it clearly was. And I think that he really exploited that to a degree that you would see Orthodox in Romania, but also feminists in Colombia, kind of, I wouldn't say jump on the bandwagon, but most certainly show a lot of sympathy to the positions he took.
Yes, I think you're right. It's very interesting the way you put it. You and I, of course, see this a little differently because I tend to see it theologically and you tend to see it politically. if I can make that distinction.
Yes, absolutely.
But there are these very clear overlaps, and we're going to see it in the next papacy, I think, even more clearly, because Leo has written the social teaching of the church very, very clearly on his banner, as it were, right from the beginning, by choosing his name, Leo. It's associated with the social teaching of the church.
Renovado.
The yes, the I think the thing that I'm not sure that my own reading of Francis that he had quite the political agenda that you suggest. You may be right. I don't know, but
I'm just happily projecting. I build my own heroes.
yes. Um, but what he did see very clearly was, and I think this is the overlap, that democracy, the democratic republican ideals that we have in the West, of course, have origins in Christianity. We tend to think, many people, that they have origins in classical Greece, but in fact they don't. They have their main origin, of course, the most important aspect, of course, in the view of the dignity of the human
The human,
person.
yeah, absolutely. The
And that is,
universalization. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that is a Judeo-Christian tradition, of
I
course,
would
that
say
even
A Christian tradition.
specifically Christian, but it also has its roots, of course,
Sure.
in Judaism. And that is why there is this automatic overlap, or ought to be, in an authentic Christian leader,
Yeah.
and that Francis was that, so that his political advocacy, for example, for the migrants, and his memorable phrases like "we turned the Mediterranean into a graveyard," I think is not so much, in the first instance, in his own mind, a political statement, even though it has obvious political ramifications and annoyed many people in Brussels, for example. Um, his starting point is, these are people made in the image of God. Each individual person is infinitely valuable. And if people die in the Mediterranean and we respond by simply trying to keep them from our shores, we are committing, as he said, a very grave sin. It's echoed in the present papacy with Pope Leo, where he said, I think only yesterday or the day before, he said that the fathers and mothers of Gaza carrying dead children in their arms cries out to heaven. This is exactly the same thing. The fact whether these people are Muslims or atheists or not is absolutely immaterial from the point of view of the Christian. They are made in the image of God, and this is a blasphemy not to
But
treat
I
them as
think
such.
it's not. I guess I want to put this not as a rejoinder at all. I mean, not an
Yes, fine,
agreement, but
do.
somehow like a slightly confrontational agreement of sorts.
Yes.
I mean, I think you're completely correct. Uh, and yet, I think that it's the depth of the moral intuition that really pervades what then becomes a political question. I don't want to quote Andrew Breitbart. That would be the last person I would like to do this kind of thing. But he has a very nice rephrasing of a Gramscian and of a Gentile, who's the fascist, the philosopher of Mussolini, which is that politics is downstream from culture. And I think that to some degree, I'm perfectly happy with politics being downstream from however is that one attacks moral issues, even if that is theologically. I'm absolutely happy with that. I do realize that there is absolutely no way that it would escape Leo. That the question about Gaza, the mothers carrying children, dead children in Gaza, uh, has massive political echo. I mean, I don't even know. I think that the political question might be even blasé in this sense because it goes much further, right? I mean, he's appealing to the foundations of what then will become political decision making. And this is what I think has been so brilliant. I mean, I almost see in Leo's words, and I don't want to get there yet, but I mean, we're
Okay.
almost there. I almost see the deployment of this great manual of pastoral theology, if you will permit me the mix, um, of the Francis school of ecclesiastology, essentially. I mean, somebody that really understands that these are things that have echo because we have nephews and because we have children and because we have parents. And, children are children and our parents are parents. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think that all of these things that we're discussing are the ones that, in the context of so much ugliness over the last 10 years, uh, for me personally, really, I would say, and this is a very strange thing to confess, I suppose, that it really was not only a man, but a place of solace, a place of political, moral solace, the sense that my intuitions were not alone, that I was not crazy, that there was a force out there that shared my sense of the desperation, I suppose, in many cases, like Ukraine, or in cases like Syria, or and so on.
Southern Sudan. Yes, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you put your finger on. You express it very well. I think you put your finger on a very important aspect of why people who are not interested in the church as such were so moved and felt personally spoken to by Francis. Um, that is true. They are, and of course, the political ramifications are obvious. I mean, I wasn't trying to pretend that they aren't
No,
there, or that the popes are not aware of it. It's. I would just say that, from my point of view, that I think they have, as it were, at least in their view. I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but in their view, they have a broader perspective. It's broader in the sense that they are, of course, involved in daily politics. They realize that the things they say are going to have an effect, or provoke a reaction in daily politics, but their intention is actually one that goes much further. I think it was Harold Wilson. It was Harold Wilson, the former British Prime Minister, who said in the 1960s, during the Sterling crisis, that a week is a long time in politics. It's become a kind of uh,
yeah,
legendary remark. I think I can put it this way: if I compare the two areas of politics and theology, a week is a long time in politics. The Catholic Church has been around for 2 millennia, and it's really is the case that therefore a century in the views in Catholicism, in the context of Catholicism, is like the blinking of an eye. It's not that the present concrete situation is not important. Of course it is, and the individual is, as we both agreed and we've been talking about. But there is also a sense that that there is a broader picture than simply coping with individual political crises as they occur.
I'm yeah, perfectly happy to accept.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. Um, all right,
I
so
think it's important to because it actually it's a question of their intention. That's all I'm
no,
saying.
I think that that's a good segue to the question of reform, which is what I want to talk about. I mean, in the large context of a 2 millennia institution, of course, it is a question. I mean, in a sense, I think that one can say what even a 2,000-year-old institution is something that really gets defined in the day to day, right, in the here and now.
Yes,
I think that that's maybe the reconciliation of both points.
yes,
I think that they effectively, I mean, Francis effectively managed to shift that. So many of our colleagues that shall remain nameless have essentially sort of bade farewell to Francis as the corpse was probably still warm, saying that this had been a failure, that it was somebody that came in full of promises and essentially went out with most of them unfulfilled. So overpromised and under-delivered. Uh, and we did talk about this when we saw each other, but I think it's worth mentioning it again because this has been a big issue. Uh, I am of the opinion that that's the completely wrong assessment. That in fact the shifts within the church over the last 10 years had been massive. That the church that I had been looking at in 2014 bears little or no resemblance with the church that institutionally and structurally that we're looking at in 2025. What's your impression?
I think you're right. Although I'll mention what I also mentioned when we talked in Berlin about this. I think there is a parallel. It seems at the moment that Francis was a kind of watershed in the Catholic Church. That his papacy was a watershed. In a sense, it was, but there have been these kinds of watersheds not infrequently before. That's what I mean also about this perspective of the 2,000-year church. And the parallel that I would see is to John the 23rd. That in fact, historians may well consider in 100 years' time that John the 23rd's contribution was even greater than Francis from the point of view, from the institutional point of view of the changes that he made. John the 23rd, of course, introduced the Second Vatican Council, which was extraordinary at the time because the intention of the council was for the church to address the modern world, to make itself relevant to the modern world, to enter into dialogue with the modern world. And it may seem now not an unusual thing for an institution to do, but at the time it was an extraordinary thing. Many people thought that it would spell the destruction of the Catholic Church. Even things that today seem very normal to us, like celebrating the liturgy in the vernacular, was a huge, immense problem for very, very many Catholics, and a crisis in the institution itself, because the liturgy had been celebrated in Latin for hundreds of years. So John the 23rd, though, was not able to carry out the implementation of the reforms of Vatican II. He died in the middle of the council, or towards the end of the council, and he was replaced, of course, by Paul VI, who was a much more administrative figure, who was criticized by the left for not being as progressive as John the 23rd, who was criticized by the right for being too progressive and too faithful to John the 23rd. I think we're going to see the same thing happening with Leo the 14th. That he is, I've been personally, it's very, very difficult, as we both said, I think, before in our conversations, it's very difficult to anticipate how our Pope is going to act, because the person doesn't only have an influence on the office also influences and changes the person. Unlike other leaders in the world, a very obvious difference is a pope is only elected once. He never has to stand for re-election. And so in the process of being elected, he inevitably has to appear to the College of Cardinals who elect him as a moderate, because he has to get 2/3 plus 1 of their votes. So he cannot be, there may be exceptions, but generally he cannot be somebody who appears to be an extremist, and he will simply not get 2/3 plus 1 of the votes that he needs.
Of course, we can agree that the difference between, say, a college of cardinals pre-Francis and a college of cardinals post-Francis has a very different, say, center of gravity, right?
This is true, but every pope does this, and one could have said the same thing after Benedict. That Benedict also packed the College of Cardinals with conservative people who we would have thought would not have elected Francis, and so on. Anyway, the thing is that even Francis behaved somewhat differently, but from what was expected. People certainly thought that he had passed. He had been considered for the papacy before in the previous election when Benedict XVI was elected. He was in fact considered by the bookies a hot favorite, and he wasn't elected. So Francis, after that, became in Argentina, in that period that Benedict XVI was Pope, he became much more reticent in his public statements. I would guess, but I'm only guessing, I may be entirely wrong, I would guess that he felt the moment had passed. He knew that he was likely to have been elected Pope. The cardinals had decided no, and he concentrated on the concrete needs of his own archdiocese. He behaved rather as a simple parish priest, traveling around on buses to visit the poor and so on in his diocese. But once he became pope, um, he shocked everybody,
Yeah.
including the cardinals, by doing things like paying his hotel bill, going back on the bus and paying his hotel bill, very, very quickly, going to Lampedusa to visit
Yeah.
the migrants, and so on. I could go on and on and on. And initially, if you remember, there was some consternation in the
Yeah. Yeah.
church.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know, so that they were expecting him to be much more moderate. They didn't expect him for a moment to say, "I'm not moving into those papal apartments. I'm going to stay in the guest house."
Yeah.
Um, so I think the same thing can happen with Leo. He has been very careful. He is a lawyer by training, ecclesiastical lawyer. He's been prior general of an order, of the Augustinian order, and he's been a man who's tried to bridge differences between people. That's been very much the image that he has projected, and I think he's been certainly that was what the cardinals almost certainly had in mind when they elected him.
I mean,
That
what I
they
find,
thought he needed to do this.
what I
I think,
find, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
but I think they may be in for a surprise. In the first 3 weeks of his papacy, he's done a number of things that suggest that there's going to be quite a bit more fire from this man than they may be expecting. I don't think he will
But what do you have in
necessarily.
mind? Can you
Well,
name
yes,
your
I
top?
saw only yesterday. I was surprised, or was it this morning, that I saw that he had made an unscheduled visit to the Borgo si Laudazio, the village which Francis wanted to set up in the grounds of the summer residence of the popes at Castel Gandolfo, where there's going to be a training center. Francis' ideas, typical Francis, these somewhat wild ideas that he was not able to fully put into practice because then he was on to something else, but wonderful ideas that he would bring together people who could study at the university level, but also people who'd just been released from prison could also be rehabilitated at the same place, and migrants could also have a home there, and it would be an ecological center in the world addressing these major problems of the world. A sort of a wonderful potpourri of wonderful ideas, but how the hell anybody was going to actually make that concrete?
Yeah.
Francis was already on to the next project. Um, it's very significant, I think, that Leo the 16th, it's Leo the 14th, made an unscheduled visit there yesterday, I think it was, saying that this is a project that has to be carried out, and we have to get down to the practical details.
I think that there has been a pretty remarkable amount of statements, gestures that have shown um, a lot of continuity, I would say, and
Hmm.
even sort of pastoral and political continuity. Uh,
Yes.
I tend to think that, I mean, there is nobody in the School of Cardinals that could have missed his tweets, right, against the Trump administration, his response to, I mean, his retweeting of this, or him shutting down J.D. Vance for his completely
Yes.
idiotic reading of Saint Augustine, and I mean, and so on and so forth. I think that also one of the things that I found most moving about it, um, about his election, is that this is an immigrant. It's just that it's an immigrant that shows to people in the White House the hospitality of other countries to Americans, right? Because I mean, this is an American immigrant in Peru, of all places. So I thought that whether that was poetic or divine justice or just an absolutely fantastic sort of wink from humor from the School of Cardinals, it was just absolutely wonderful. John, to finish, what are the main things that you think we should be looking out for in terms of defining Leo's papacy and the years ahead?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it's very difficult to predict exactly how a pope will will act because he himself changes the office and the office changes him. But I think already we are seeing some quite important signals that Leo is going to honor and continue the legacy of Francis. One of the very obvious things is that one of his first appointments is of a woman to the dicastery for consecrated life, the ministry, as it were, in the Vatican that is responsible for all monks and nuns in the world and members of religious orders. So he is clearly going to follow in Francis' footsteps as far as policy is concerned. And I think that he will that one of the things that we need to look out for, of course, is if he replaces the man who is in charge of the Congregation for the Faith, the main theologian of the Catholic Church.
So you think that the form or the essentially the theological affiliation of that figure will, to a large degree, tell us quite a bit about his.
Certainly, if it's a progressive theologian, as I suspect it will be, it will be somebody who will be dealing with the burning questions of whether, for example, women should be admitted to the diaconate, which is the first step of priestly ordination. This is a very difficult question because, as you know, there are different views around the world, and it's a very explosive and difficult question, and requires theological finesse and not only sensibility.
So, John, thank you very, very, very much. That was very kind of you with your time and your experience and knowledge on these matters. It's always a pleasure to exchange views on these issues, particularly because we come from different places. So, I find it really enriching to have these
Well,
conversations.
I do too. So yes, that's the beauty of diversity, surely, that
Indeed,
it is
indeed.
enriching of its very nature.
So, if at any point you feel inclined to come visit again, please just send me a message, and I will be more than happy to make time.
Thanks very much. I will. Yeah.
My regards to Romania.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And my regards to Berlin.
Shall do. Shall do. Talk to you soon.